Okay, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon to those in Europe and Turkey. Welcome to yet another discussion on US-Turkiye relations. In the wake of the Vilnius summit, there has been a lot of things that happened in terms of NATO enlargement, Turkey's green light for Sweden's membership. Turkey had already greenlit the membership for Finland, and now Sweden will be in as well. And this will probably have implications on the US-Turkiye relations going forward. We saw quite a few meetings that President Erdogan held in Vilnius, including President Biden, and that will have an impact on F-16 sales that Turkey is seeking from the United States. I have two distinguished guests to discuss this context and the Turkish-American relations. Luke Coffey from Hudson Institute recently wrote a piece about this on arabnews.com. I saw the piece there, Luke. I think that's where it was originally published. And then our research director, Kilic, Kanat, was actually in Vilnius during the summit. And I'm very curious about his reaction and observations on the ground, let's say. But I want to start with Luke. Luke, your piece was trying to highlight Turkish diplomatic efforts during the summit and President Erdogan's role in terms of NATO enlargement and those dynamics. So I think you're still on mute, but I'll ask you for your comments, your overview of how the summit you think in general went. As you note, Ukraine did not get what it wanted exactly. They wanted a clear timeline and an invitation from NATO, but still there were a lot of good news in terms of NATO's unity, enlargement, etc. I'll leave it to you for your assessment, and then we'll go to Kilic for his observations as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Kadir, and thanks for organizing this this discussion and for inviting me to speak. It's always a pleasure to participate in your events. I think overall the summit was a success. I know a lot of people were disappointed by the lack of an invitation for Ukraine to join the alliance. I think part of the problem was expectations were so high going into the summit that it was almost impossible to meet these expectations. But we have crossed the bridge on Ukraine joining NATO. It is no longer a discussion and no longer a doubt. It's not a matter of if, it's now a matter of when. And this is a lot different from previous summits. The fact that the membership action plan requirement was removed is symbolically important, but symbolism matters in international affairs. And for those of us who've been following this enlargement debate inside NATO for years, we understand the importance that the getting rid of the map process, how important this is and what that means. Turkey played an important role throughout this process of enlargement. Many outside observers were surprised when President Erdogan said that Ukraine should be in NATO, be a member of NATO. For the Turkey watchers like myself who follow these events very closely for years, I was not surprised. I thought this was a continuation of Turkey's long-standing policy of supporting NATO enlargement. Ankara has been one of the strongest supporters of enlargement in recent years inside the alliance, whether it is enlargement in the Balkans or Georgia's NATO aspirations or now Ukraine's. We see a consistent and regular message from Ankara supporting NATO enlargement. So I think overall the summit was positive. Could the wording have been stronger on Ukraine? Yes, it could have. But are we heading in the right direction? Absolutely, we are. And even on the second day of the summit, President Zelensky tweeted out acknowledging the reality that as long as Ukraine is involved in a major war with Russia, membership is not going to be possible. And I think this is the general consensus inside the alliance. Now, in terms of Turkey's specific role, greenlighting Sweden's entry into the alliance was very positive. Turkey's support for Ukraine's NATO aspirations was very positive. The one thing to me that stood out was President Erdogan's energy, diplomatic energy, I guess you could say, meeting with all these different leaders on the margins of the summit. Even his Greek counterpart, the first meeting with President Biden and Joe Biden's capacity as president of the United States. These were all positive developments, and I really hope that we can use this engagement that we saw, the relationship building that we saw between President Biden and President Erdogan, as an opportunity to maybe reset relations between Washington, D.C. and Ankara. I hope there was enough confidence building happening behind the scenes that we can see some progress being made on improving this bilateral relationship. And then finally, I'll say President Erdogan showed himself as one of the leading international statesmen of his time right now. He has shown himself, I think part of this is from all of his experience now being in power, but also his legacy building. He is in his final term as president, and he's acutely aware of his role in the recent history of the Turkish Republic. So I think a lot of this plays in his activities and his actions as well. And so I'm cautiously optimistic about the US-Turkish relationship going forward and Turkey's continued important role in geopolitics, especially in the region.
Luke, I do want this session to focus on US-Turkish relations, but there's one audience question. Maybe you can quickly address it so we don't have to come back to that topic. But the question is, if Ukraine can't get into NATO so long as the war goes on, doesn't this give incentive for Putin to keep the war going?
Absolutely, it does. And in fact, the Kremlin has worked out the perfect formula to keep countries outside of NATO. They invade and then partially occupy. We saw this with Georgia in 2008, where Russia continues to occupy 20% of Georgia's internationally recognized territory. We saw this with Crimea in 2014, and then, of course, the ongoing war in Ukraine today. We see this with the continued military presence of Russian forces inside the internationally recognized borders of Moldova. So yes, Russia has perfected this formula. If we, the West, if we, NATO, want to get Ukraine inside the alliance, then we have to arm and equip Ukraine for a quick and decisive victory against the Russian Federation. That is the fastest and most direct route to get Ukraine inside NATO. In a nutshell, we have to start wanting Ukraine to win more than we just hope Russia's going to lose. And hopefully, coming out of the NATO summit, this is focusing the minds of NATO's leaders on ways to help Ukraine actually win and win quickly and decisively.
Thank you, Luke. Kilic, Luke was referring to the, behind the scenes meetings and talks, etc. When I spoke to you when you were there, you said that, it was a lot about Turkey. There was a lot of debate and, everything was about Turkey almost. And we saw some of that in the media, but, Luke is pointing out that it's actually not, Turkey's role is not acknowledged enough or underlined enough. Feel free to respond to that. But in terms of Biden-Erdogan meeting and what was on the agenda, especially F-16s and other issues. What do you expect? What were your observations?
I think Luke is right in terms of describing the diplomatic energy of President Erdogan during the meeting, and both last year in Madrid and now in Vilnius. President Erdogan was probably the most prominent figure making statements and determining the fate of NATO's expansion process. And of course, he responded some unfair criticisms directed towards Turkey during the membership debates. I was in his press conference, and in the press conference, he stated that this process, Sweden literally applied last year. So completing a NATO membership of a country in 1 year is rather a fast process, a quick process. And he referred to Northern Macedonia and how just a name actually can make a country to wait more than 10 years for the membership. So he was responding to that unfair criticism that was directed to Turkey since Sweden officially applied for NATO membership last year. Coming to Biden-Erdogan summit, this is the third time Biden and Erdogan is meeting on the sidelines of NATO summits. The first meeting they had was in Brussels in 2021, in April 2021, just a few days after their first phone call. And in that summit, they started to talk about F-16 issue. And it was at that time, it was a surprising development because following the S-400 and F-35 crisis between two countries, many people expected not to have a significant movement in the defense industrial relations between two countries. But with the F-16 offers, it kind of reached a certain point and there was a cautious optimism. And last year in Madrid summit, two leaders again meet on the sidelines of NATO summit. And again, in addition to Sweden's membership to NATO, one of the issues was F-16. And both in Brussels and in Madrid last year, President Biden expressed support for Turkey's purchase of F-16s. And now we were on the third summit in Vilnius. And those who follow Turkish-American relations, one of the most significant punchline of this summit and the meeting between President Biden and President Erdogan was again F-16 issue. And we can see a tone change in Biden administration's approach to Turkey. And I agree with Luke, and I'm also cautiously optimistic. The fact that President Biden tweeted in the night of the election, congratulating President Erdogan and calling him the first day after the election on the 24th, 25th, although it was Memorial Day, and although many were expecting that Biden may not make a phone call to Erdogan to congratulate him a few days because of the Memorial Day or different reasons, because as you may recall, the first phone call after Biden's inauguration took place only after 3 months. And it was partly it was the first phone call, but partly it was a tense phone call due to President Biden's decision about the 1915 events between Armenians and Turks in the Ottoman Empire. So there was a lot of change when Biden called, at least the atmosphere and change between two countries, and the fact that two leaders met again. And immediately after that meeting, Biden tweeted with a video about the President Erdogan and his meeting with him, and expressed support. Both Blinken and President Biden himself expressed support. F-16 is a positive note in the relations. However, there are a couple things. That is the optimistic part. The cautious optimistic part is I can sense some frustration, at least among some policymakers in Turkey, about this linkage politics that some members of the Congress and even some those who are the administration was trying to link F-16 to Sweden's membership to NATO. That was unacceptable for Turkey, and I can see that. And the second thing is Turkey President Erdogan at least wants to run the relation with the United States in a more presidential diplomacy, in a bilateral way, instead of the regional issues can be a matter of debate between those two leaders. But I think President Erdogan values more presidential diplomacy between him and President Biden. And the third thing is, I think whenever, and this is not the first time actually, it has been now decades that in different times when Turkey wanted to purchase some arms and defense equipment from United States, there's always this congressional blockage. And we kind of keep hearing from the administration that we want to sell these weapons, but the Congress. And Turkey, I think this time made clear that it is the US administration's job to convince the members of the Congress about this purchase and make it happen. So I think this was the most important issue. And of course, after this new beginning, if we can say immediately after President Erdogan's election on the 24th of May, we can expect some more bilateral meetings, because it was interesting to see multiple phone calls between Coffey and Secretary Blinken in a couple of days. And I think we can expect another meeting in General Assembly and even a visit from President Erdogan to White House in the coming months to resolve those dormant issues that has been plaguing the relations between two countries, that include Syria, which is now two countries may find a way to work together if United States is willing to do that. The YPG issue, because the Turkish election demonstrated how PKK issue is important. It is not a partisan issue for both opposition and the government. That was one of the most significant issues. And we have seen in the polls that Turks consider the PKK issue and the terrorism threat one of the most important issues that determine not only their political viewpoint and voting behavior, but they consider it very important for the country as well. So in the coming months, if two countries want to mend their ties, I think F-16 and development in F-16 would be an important step, and continuation of these positive messages would change the atmosphere in both capitals. The YPG issue that two countries the foreign policy makers needs to think how to resolve that issue. And of course, the present sanctions on Turkey in regards to defense industry, although it doesn't involve F-16, and since the head of the national defense industry in Turkey changed, it may not be considered too important at this point. But we know that these kind of sanctions may give some chilling effect to other companies to do business with Turkey as well. So removal of those sanctions, these will be important issues that would be discussed in the coming months. Of course, the war, depending on the future of the war between Ukraine and Russia, the war, the grain deal, if it will be repeated or not. It stopped yesterday. Russia suspended it. So we will see that two countries can find so many regional and global issues to work together, and resolving these decades-long right now problems between the bilateral problems between these two countries would be the first step to do that.
Kilic, since you referred to the grain deal, there's a question, but I just want very short answer if you can. The question is, can you comment on Turkish efforts to have Russia return to the grain deal? Can this be done, and what are the options?
It has been, Luke just mentioned, but President Erdogan has been very successful in these diplomatic negotiations, and he, in multiple different instances, we have seen that Russia never suspended it, but there was some voices that signal it may not be renewed, and in multiple different instances, President Erdogan convinced President Putin about this. And we don't know yet, but I'm pretty sure that behind the scenes, there is intense diplomatic negotiations going on, and Turkey will do everything. President Erdogan, he signaled that as well in his press conferences. Right now, he's in Turkish part of the Cyprus, but in his meetings, in his media statements before visiting even the Gulf, he signaled that he will do everything in his capacity to make this deal happen again. Of course, it depends on Russia, but I think Erdogan's diplomatic energy and diplomatic skills now show that he may be able to pull this again.
Thank you, Kilic. You gave us a lot of things to think about. And Luke, I want to ask you something. Kilic talked about, piggyback on his comments. He referred to counterterrorism issues. Part of the deal, part of the promise that Turkey made about, Sweden, on the part of NATO, there was a promise that there would be a new counterterrorism czar, I guess, if you want to call it that. How do you think that could materialize, and what is the significance of that? Because NATO, has been described in many ways. It's essentially a defensive alliance, but it deals with a lot of issues, including cyber security, the space, competition with China, many other things. US has a lot of expectations from NATO as well. So Turkey's expectation about counterterrorism is now acknowledged by the organization, by the alliance. What is the significance of that, do you think?
I think largely it's more of a symbolic significance. I want to say up front that the concerns that Turkey had regarding the PKK and their affiliates inside Sweden were legitimate, and it shows the value of having a consensus-based security organization like NATO, that everyone can get around the table and work on these issues so everyone's legitimate security concerns are addressed. And I have no doubt that Turkey's security is going to be enhanced by Sweden's membership into the alliance. And I have no doubt that Sweden's security is going to be enhanced by joining the same security alliance that Turkey is a member of. So I just want to put that out there in the very beginning. On the specific question about any counterterrorism role that NATO may have, NATO can be a tool in the counterterrorism toolbox, but we can't expect NATO to lead on counterterrorism issues or even start shifting its focus on counterterrorism issues. Mainly because NATO, as an intergovernmental security alliance, lacks the policy competencies that are required to fight terrorism. NATO doesn't have any policy competency over the freezing of terrorist bank accounts or terrorist financing. It doesn't have border control or border security or Coast Guard or competencies. It doesn't have any law enforcement competencies. It has very little intelligence gathering and sharing competencies when it comes to transnational crime or transnational terrorist activity. It does have a military component, a hard power component, which can play a role in counterterrorism. But it's practically speaking, NATO was neither created nor is it equipped to be a counterterrorism force. However, that being said, this recognition of the terrorist threat, especially in the context of PKK, is a very important one. I think it's a symbolic one. And I think in international affairs, symbolism matters and it's important. So I think it's only a positive development.
Thank you, Luke. Another thing that Kilic mentioned, the congressional aspects.
Can I add a point to this? I agree with Luke, but just want to add a few sentences about Turkey's position here. I guess Turkey was, especially after US support for YPG and the continuation of financial or different forms of support for that organization in different European countries, there is a frustration in Turkey about the security issues. And Turkish foreign policy makers argue that if this would be a security alliance without, any exception, if one country is being threatened by an external threat, whether it's a nation state or a terrorist threat, at least there may not be an operational capacity of NATO, but the member countries, since they are allies, needs to take a common position, at least take steps to prevent the activities of a terrorist, an internationally recognized terrorist organization and their activities within their borders. I think Turkey's position was, if we're gonna depend on each other, and if Article 5 is so important, if one for all and all for one, Turkey's legitimate security concerns, and from NATO Secretary General to President Biden, everybody agreed that these are legitimate concerns. These legitimate concerns need to be taken into account if the alliance will expand or if the alliance will take a different approach in terms of security.
Luke, if you have a response to that, that's fine. But I wanted to ask you about congressional dynamics. Some senators had openly said that, it depended, their decision on F-16 sale was dependent on Sweden's membership. But there are some who will probably not be convinced still, and they might need a lot of lobbying on the part of the White House. Biden administration has shown support for this deal, but they're gonna need to convince some congressional members. What can you tell us about that dynamic?
That's absolutely right. And this White House has a congressional challenge. Before the midterms last year, when the Democrats controlled the House, I think they took support for big issues for granted, whether it was support for Ukraine or any other issue. And they didn't really, the White House didn't really work Capitol Hill very hard. There wasn't much pressure, much lobbying being done. And now that the Republicans control the House, the White House is going to have to step up its game on engaging and working with Capitol Hill more. The reality is, in America's presidential system of government, the legislative body, almost uniquely in Western democracies, has the ability to make U.S. foreign policy and at least edit or shape U.S. foreign policy. And even though foreign policy, according to the U.S. Constitution, is the prerogative of the executive, the executive cannot ignore the legislative branch. So we need the White House, we need the Oval Office, we need President Biden himself engaging with key stakeholders on Capitol Hill, making the case, putting pressure, explaining why this F-16 deal is important for U.S. national interests. But I'm not sure we're gonna see this. I hope we will. And ironically, in this case, the biggest holdup comes from the president's own political party. So if President Biden cannot use his influence amongst his own political party on Capitol Hill, then I question what sort of influence and power that President Biden has over Capitol Hill as a whole. Mm-hmm. So again, I use the words cautiously optimistic. I think those members of Congress and Senate understand the bigger picture. They understand why the F-16 deal is important for not only Turkey, but also for U.S. national interests. But we have to recognize that there are lobbyists behind the scenes from different diaspora groups that are also trying to make the case against such a move. And we need the White House to show some leadership.
Luke, this NATO, on the part of Congress, the idea that NATO should be important is strong, is shared. It's a bipartisan point, and a lot of Democrats would agree with that. Do you think that's not a strong enough argument? Because Turkey has been using these F-16s for, I think, 4 decades, and it makes the NATO alliance actually stronger if Turkey has strong air force, and it needs to maintain this. And if there is not enough cooperation from Washington, Turkey is going to have to go to maybe Europeans and others. So isn't even that argument, you think, is falling somehow weak on the Hill?
Clearly, the holdup is not about understanding or appreciating what's in America's national interests. It's about lobbyist groups from Greek American community, Armenian American community, applying pressure on certain members of Congress and the Senate to either slow down or block these deals. Mm-hmm. A high school student studying geopolitics would be able to see why it's in America's interests that Turkey has these F-16s. These members of Congress, the Senate, the staffers, they know this too. They're not dumb people. But there are outside pressures that are trying to influence this debate, and it's ultimately undermining America's national interests.
Thank you, Luke. Kilic, if this somehow proceeds in a positive manner and the deal goes through, senators like Menendez are convinced along the way by the White House, if the deal goes through, what do you expect for the future in terms of defense relationship between the United States and Turkey?
I think it would jumpstart the relation, and it is not we are talking about F-16, but there are other defense products, including the Honeywell engines for the attack helicopters in Turkey, which Turkey has been waiting for a long period of time now. There are multiple different defense equipment that Turkey wants to purchase, and defense industry has been the linchpin of the strategic relations between United States and Turkey for a long period of time. And as we look at what happened in F-35 issue, we have seen that the first impediment for F-35 was basically some members of the Congress putting a new condition, releasing Andrew Brunson for getting so that Turkey can get its own F-35s, which it already paid. And after his release, there was condition that, will there be any technical problem between S-400 and F-35? And those congressional moves basically lead to exit of Turkey from F-35 program, which probably hurt the F-35 program as well, because the Turkish companies was producing 95 different parts of F-35, including central fuselage. So this is in F-16 issue. It is when it happened, there were multiple different questions that it is lowering standard, but at the same time, the defense industry to this point that even the successful movement of this F-16 deal would be considered as a success right now. And if it happens, and if it is successful, I think the next step would be to revive the defense industry cooperation, given the fact that Turkey has been extremely successful for the last couple of years in defense industry, especially through its drone programs. And I think following a successful F-16 deal, probably F-35 deal would be back in Turkish-American relations. Turkey may not be a partner of F-35 program, but as a recipient country, we may expect in the improvement of the relation that F-35 issue will be back on the agenda.
Kilic, there's an audience question. I want to pose that to you again. If you can respond rather brief. We are coming to the end of our session, but how serious is President Erdogan's revival of EU accession talks? Does he actually want to join EU, or is there any other motivation? Does the US have a view on Turkey joining EU? I'll ask that last one to Luke, but I think there has been some confusion about what the deal involved in terms of Turkey's relations with the EU during the summit. Maybe you can clarify some of that and explain what the Turkish side's view about the EU process.
The last part of the question Luke will answer, but just to give a historical background that United States has been in 1990s after Turkey's formal application very supportive, and in Helsinki summit, President Clinton played a critical role in convincing European countries about Turkey's membership process. And it's if the first part of the question is Erdogan, does he really want the EU process? Under his leadership, actually, Turkey started the accession talks with European Union, but there were multiple different impediments, and the last impediment was following the refugee crisis. I think the EU accession talks would be a medium goal, but in the short-term goal, there are two priorities for Turkey. One is updating and upgrading the customs union agreement between European Union and Turkey. And secondly, the visa liberalization, which the Schengen visas has been a significant problem for many Turkish citizens in the last couple of months right now. There has been public anger towards Schengen countries for delaying and postponing even the interview appointments. I think the goodwill on the part of Europe would be to revive talks about the customs union, the upgrading customs union agreement and liberalization process. But of course, in the medium term, the EU talks and accession and how it can revive and how it can resume would be an important topic. Following President Erdogan's actually meeting in NATO, a foreign policy team under the leadership of Akif Çağatay Kılıç actually went to Brussels to negotiate with his counterparts about I may not remember the countries, but it is France, Germany, and some other countries. They were having talks in Brussels about how to revive the EU accession talks of Turkey and membership progress.
Thank you, Kilic. Luke, the reason, of course, I wanted to pose that question to you you might have a different view about the EU compared to the establishment view, Washington establishment views, perhaps. Your views on the UK's departure is well known. What is your take on that? I mean, like Kilic explained, in the short term, there are some of these priorities Turkey is losing out on in terms of customs union. It wants that to be upgraded and changed, modified. And then, there's the visa issue. But in terms of broader sort of strategic perspective, one sentence President Erdogan said during the Vilnius summit was, look, most NATO members are also EU members, and Ukraine is actually on its way to become an EU member, even despite the war. So how would you view that sort of in terms of strategic outlook for NATO and EU?
Yeah, well, my view on EU membership is that every European country has to decide for itself if the sovereignty it gives to Brussels is worth the benefits they get back in return. For many European countries, it's very obvious that the bits of sovereignty they give to Brussels, the benefits they receive outweigh this loss of sovereignty in certain areas. So every country has to make this determination. Every country's leadership has to do this, and Turkey, of course, is no different. From the very beginning of European integration after World War II, going back to 1951 and the European coal and steel community, the United States has supported deeper integration and wider membership. And as Kilic pointed out, U.S. policy towards possible Turkey membership into the European Union is no different today. I do agree with Kilic that some of these lower hanging fruits will first be picked, whether it's regarding customs union issues or visa liberalization, especially with the Schengen area. But I think ultimately Turkey does see itself as being a member of the European Union. How close we are to that outcome remains to be seen. I think we're probably quite far away. But I would caution against the excitement that some might have for Turkey joining, or also even Ukraine. I think many in Western Europe like to hold on to the power and influence they have inside the EU. And a lot of the decision-making and voting is done weighted on population. So take Turkey, for example, would become the most populous country in the European Union. If Ukraine joined tomorrow, it would become the 5th most populous country in the European Union. Imagine if both Turkey and Ukraine joined, and then you have Romania, that's already the 5th largest country in terms of population, and Poland, which is the 6th largest. So in a practical sense, you would actually see the center of gravity in terms of voting and how seats are allocated in the European Parliament shifting to the east. And I'm not so sure Berlin and Paris are excited by this prospect, regardless of what they say about Ukraine joining or maybe even someday Turkey joining. So just a cautionary note there. But I think ultimately, if the Turkish people vote they vote for a Turkish leader that wants to join the European Union, this is a matter for Turkey to decide, and the U.S. should support the decision that Turkey makes one way or the other, regardless, since it's our ally and partner.
Luke, thank you for that. So we've discussed some of the security issues as well as EU membership as well. Kilic was it was a little glitchy. I don't know if the audience fully heard it, but Kilic was predicting perhaps some meetings between President Erdogan and Biden during the UN summit, perhaps separately bilateral summit in the coming months. Just very briefly, outside the issues we talked about, when the two come together, what are the themes that they should actually address to strengthen this strategic partnership and go beyond the problems, but actually build something that, that is productive for the region and for the alliance as well. But I don't want you to discuss in detail the issues, but just point things out that, there could be areas of cooperation.
Are you asking me or?
Yeah, go ahead, Kilic. Let's start with you and then we'll end with Luke.
So 3 topics that would be really important would be, number 1 would be economic relations, and the trade volume between United States and Turkey is increasing, but it never reached to its full potential, especially after debates on supply chain shifts and everything. Turkey can become an important trade partner for United States, and during Trump administration, they started to discuss this goal of reaching $100 billion trade volume. I think that would be, considering economic issues that Turkey is facing, this would be an important arena. Second one is energy security, and energy security is also a significant issue that, especially in regards to, especially after the Russia-Ukraine war, and the crisis in Eastern Mediterranean. Turkey has been on its south and on its north. There has been different disputes in regards to the energy. I think providing energy security would be, and increasing Turkey's role in energy security would be an important arena. And finally, the Middle East and the issues in the Middle East. I know that the US administration is not, doesn't seem to be very much invested in the developments in the Middle East, but both crisis in Syria, the crisis in different parts of the Gulf, and these issues needs to be resolved for the regional stability, so that it will not have kind of exporting insecurities or any kind of humanitarian tragedies to other parts of Europe. I think 2 countries can continue and establish a working relationship in some of the crisis areas in the Middle East. Of course, in Caspian, the Azerbaijan and the war in Ukraine would be the areas that 2 countries will continue to find common ground in the coming months. But those 3 issues can be a new chapter, actually, beginning of new chapter between 2 countries.
Luke, Kilic mentioned quite a few of the issues. I'm sure you were going to mention them as well, but what would you put at the top of the agenda, let's say, if you were designing the agenda items in a meeting between Biden and Erdogan?
I really can't add to his list. But one point I want to make is how these are issues that are actually achievable. These are the issues where we can build confidence to then work on the bigger issues that are plaguing and causing problems for the bilateral relationship. So let's start with this. We're not going to solve S-400. We're not going to solve F-35. Let's park those issues. Let's move on and find ways to get the US-Turkish relationship back on track where it belongs.
Well, Luke Coffey from Hudson Institute, Kilic Kanat from SETA Washington. I thank both of you for this discussion. I think it was very, very important in the wake of the Vilnius summit. US-Turkish relations are probably going to move in a more positive direction, but let's see how it goes. We will continue to discuss these issues. Once again, I want to thank the audience also for joining us. Have a great day, both of you, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.